This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Now, Matt, you were telling us before you came on that the last time you saw Chuck was 2 years ago in Baton Rouge. Now, he covered that 20-plus people tab at Rufino's that night, right? He paid for everyone? That sounds like Chuck.
Was that his way of, like, fattening the calf before the slaughter?
The slaughter for
the next day wasn't so great for the good guys.
That was
these
but
guys
dinner was
know
great.
I didn't pick up the tab. They know I did not pick up the tab. We wouldn't have eaten that well. We wouldn't have been at Rufino's had I been buying. Man, I love going to Rufino's now. I was so sorry to hear the Ruffin pass.
Yeah, Ruffin was he was one of a kind, man. He loved the Tigers, but he loved college football and he loved the SEC and took a tremendous. For those that don't know, I mean, Ruffin played at LSU in the '80s and just took so much pride in the league and being a college football player and having so many of those relationships. Such a relationship guy, and that's why. You know, when Chuck and the guys, or anybody from around the conference, or a lot of the ESPN guys, Herb Street, they always had that relationship. Whenever they come in town, that's the spots where everybody goes. And Ruffin was a big part of that. We miss him. Where
do you go when you come to Fayetteville? I know you've got pre- and post-game obligations, but where do you go when you're in town?
I have only been to LSU Arkansas games in Little Rock.
Wow. Okay.
I've never been to Reynolds Razorback Stadium. One of the well, if you include Missouri, one of two.
Don't waste your time going there.
One of two. Oh, I've been to all of them in the league except those two stadiums. So I've been to Little Rock more times than I can count, but have not made it up to Northwest Arkansas for a game. How about that?
You got to do it at some point,
we got to fix that.
Got to do it.
Well, it won't be this year because the Hogs are coming early to Baton Rouge. I mean, that's a change in the schedule. We were talking about that. You know, normally Arkansas gets LSU in a tender moment after an Alabama game. This year, Arkansas is going to get in full brunt right in the crosshairs.
I think, you know, I know I've had this conversation plenty over the years, and especially whenever the Friday after Thanksgiving game got moved, and I know that didn't sit well with Arkansas fans. I think, you know, from the time that the Hogs came into the league, that was something that was really embraced playing that game. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I've had that conversation enough. And I think LSU fans in the collective program sort of resented being in that time slot. But there, and then the week after Alabama, was always a spot that just where it fell on the schedule was going to benefit Arkansas. You were going to get LSU not at their best after they play Alabama. For better or worse, that Alabama game for this LSU program, for the players, the coaches, the fans, the everybody, it's ever since Nick has been there, it's just the biggest, it's the one everybody looks at first on the schedule. Yeah. And you're always going to get LSU on a lull the week after. The fact that this game's in September now, I think is there is no excuse. It completely eliminates that. I think you get a healthier, fresher, more focused team from LSU.
Do we see more offense this year? Last three games have been decided by 3 points, and they've been gross. I mean, you hadn't surpassed, I think, 25 in any of them. Jane Daniels and KJ are probably going to be first and second team All-SEC, depending on where you rank them. Yeah. Do they get going in this game in Week 4? I
think so, but you know what else, Ty? Last year was gross because of the turnovers. Both teams had scoring opportunities up and down the field. I remember Arkansas had a couple of fourth downs that they got stopped inside the red zone. I mean, it was such a weird game. Harold Perkins took over. It was,
we were going to try to get through this without bringing him up.
But how could you not? You know, I mean, that was a one-man wrecking crew. I mean, you just don't see many games where one defensive player
as a true freshman
takes over
in this
like
league.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we saw maybe Tyrann Mathieu do it at times. God, do y'all remember that Big 12? This is random. You remember that Big 12 championship game with Nebraska and Texas in 2009 when Ndamukong Suh had like 6-7 sacks?
12-9. Yeah, 12-9.
It was like that. But, man, you know, Perkins was special, obviously, last year. But to answer your question, I do. I think you're going to – and especially, guys, in a league where this may be the worst year for quarterbacks in the SEC since 2014, 15 maybe. And outside of KJ and Jaden, what are we talking about? Spencer Rattler? I mean, what do we really know about Joe Milton? I mean, I think you said it right, Ty. I mean, it's KJ and it's Jaden. I mean, those are the two best quarterbacks in the league.
You know, in last year's game, it was so miserably, brutally cold. I mean, LSU gutted it out and finding a way to win that. But I think that speaks a little bit to the toughness that Kelly's instilling in that program. I mean, they just had to take that game last year. And like you said, it's a 3-point game, low scoring. But that was not an easy one for whoever came out the victor.
I think the entire flow of that game would have been different if KJ had played. I think I don't know that the result necessarily would have been different, but I feel like LSU knew, and especially after the early turnovers, that they could kind of just, you know, like the big brother put your hand on the little brother's head and they're swinging at you. They would just never let them get close. I think LSU played a defensive game. I don't mean like the defensive side of the ball. I just mean they didn't need to be super aggressive because that was what was going to cost them the game. I know, and then, of course, Arkansas made the quarterback switch late in the game and kind of got some things going offensively, but I really feel like if KJ had played, we would have just seen a completely different game up there that day.
Hey, Matt, this is Chuck again. You said something there that I thought was interesting. You said LSU didn't feel like they had to be aggressive in that game, and you're exactly right. How aggressive can they be with Daniels now? And I'm not just talking about, you know, turning him loose. I'm talking about throwing the ball downfield, doing some things that perhaps would expand his game. Because I think Arkansas people look at KJ in much of a similar fashion. I just wonder where you think he is in that regard.
Yeah, Chuck, I think we saw that progression. Obviously didn't see it in the Arkansas game last year, but I think we did see that progression from Jaden as the season went along. And if LSU played Tennessee in Baton Rouge earlier in the year, and there was a moment that LSU fans will remember, but there was a play where Tennessee had jumped off sides, and LSU had a single coverage outside route with a receiver, I think it was Jere Jenkins, just sprinting down the field. And, I mean, it's a free play. And Jaden didn't throw the ball. He just threw it away. And he's coming to the sideline, and Brian Kelly is just – the cameras caught him just reaming. Like, you could hear him say, throw the expletive ball. And then, then a week later, they're down in Gainesville. Same thing happens, and he lets it rip and just threw a jump ball as Ray Jenkins caught and scored a touchdown. I think we saw that sort of progression with Jaden. And one thing that I know this might be in a vacuum in the moment is tough to understand, but when you can pull back and look at the 10,000-foot view, it makes sense. Jaden Daniels was sort of building the bridge as he crossed it last year. He didn't know any of these players. The season was a progression and a development, and I think the thing that you just couldn't do last year if you were Jaden is turn the ball over and lose because you threw 3 picks in a game. So I think it was safer to just eat it, take the sack, throw the ball away instead of force the ball into coverage that's going to lose you a game. And LSU won a lot of close games because of it, but I do think we saw more of that progression as the season goes along. I'd expect it this year too.
So what did the Florida State game do to maybe adjust things or set a different tone after the way that turned out? And what will that game mean this year for LSU?
Well, I think last year it was a reality check for everybody because I don't think there are many LSU fans thinking that in New Orleans LSU was going to lose that game. And they played about as badly as you could play in a game. They muffed 2 punts inside their own 10-yard line and missed a PAT. I mean, it was an ugly game. But this year, it is rightfully the centerpiece game of the opening weekend. I don't know if you all have looked at the slate of the opening weekend. It's a top 10 matchup. It's going to be the marquee game, the standalone on that Sunday. But in a very literal sense, if you're LSU, if you lose that game, you have no margin for error because people are talking about can this team make the playoff and make a run. Well, if you lose that game, now there's never been a 2-loss team make the playoff. So you lose that game, you have no margin for error. You cannot lose again. So I think everyone is squarely focusing on that game with that as the intention to say, no, you've got, whatever the score may be, however it may go, you've got to leave Orlando with a win.
I want to talk about 2024 for a sec. When we were watching the selection show, I was surprised that LSU Arkansas was included in the list of rivalry games that they mentioned because I don't feel like you mentioned LSU fans don't seem to care about that game as much. Were you surprised to see that game kind of make that list and the SEC make that a priority for 2024?
No, I can't say that I was surprised to see it. I think it's more how the league prioritized, how the schedule was going to play out. My guess is the way they did this was they went with the musts, right? You start with your schedule grid, and you what games are absolutely being played. And so the Iron Bowl is going to be played. Florida, Georgia is going to be played, and Bama, Tennessee. You all know the games. So they started with that, and then said, how else can we fill in the schedule to make it equitable for everyone? And so, for LSU, for example, LSU's not going to play Mississippi State. That's LSU's oldest rival. It's the team they played the most in the history of the program. So LSU doesn't play State, but they did keep the Arkansas game. So maybe that's a product of State having other games that they have to keep, or maybe I don't know exactly how they put up the grid. Nothing really, I think, with it surprised me. It would have surprised me if LSU's not going to play Auburn as well. That's my favorite rivalry game with LSU. But
so if LSU, if Texas and Texas A&M play the final game of the year, who does LSU
great
want?
Question. Who
does LSU want to play the last game of the year?
Great question. It's so strange because it's like it's a one to have your cake and eat it too type thing especially with the context of the Arkansas game, that was always LSU's game at the end of the season, and LSU fans didn't want to play it. But I don't think it was necessarily they didn't want to play that game then. It was the Friday. They want to play it on the Friday at 1:30. If it comes back around to where LSU and Arkansas play on the final weekend, I think that's fine. I think the A&M series with LSU has sort of very naturally developed a lot of tendencies that rivalries have. You had the 7 overtime game, and there's a lot of animosity between the fan bases. It's been competitive the past few years. So I think that would be fine. But the problem with LSU is they don't have a natural rival. They don't. There's no geographic rival. There is no Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Auburn, Alabama, even a non-conference like Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Louisville. LSU doesn't have it. If you ask LSU fans who their biggest rival is, it's going to depend on how old that fan is. My grandfather will tell you Ole Miss. Yeah. My dad will tell you Alabama. I love the Auburn game. You know what I mean? It's just, it really just kind of depends. So I don't know what they're going to do.
We kind of made reference to the Jaden Daniels KJ matchup, which we'll get to see. Didn't get it last year because of the injury to KJ Jefferson. 2015, Enos' first year, they went down to Baton Rouge and thoroughly had a great game plan for that game.
Golly.
LSU has to play Rogers the week before in Starkville, and then has to match up against KJ Jefferson. What kind of game plan does that take for going up against maybe two of the best quarterbacks in the SEC West, and the different preparations back-to-back weeks?
So you're talking about for LSU's defense against KJ?
Trying to deal that with KJ.
I think when I think of KJ Jefferson, and you all have seen him much more than I have, but the differentiator for him is he is so big and such a physical runner. It's sort of Tebow-esque. You just always think that this guy, if he needs 3 yards, is going to get 4 if he has to tuck it and run. So where LSU was deficient a year ago was in their front 7. They just didn't have numbers. After Mason Smith got hurt, guys, this blows people away when I say this. LSU rotated 3 defensive tackles last year. 3 all year. 3.
Low.
I mean, Mekhi Wingo, who's going to be here today, played 98% of the defensive snaps. This guy never came off the field. It was incredible. Where LSU went ham on the portal, they added 4 interior defensive tackles. They're getting Mason Smith healthy again, and they've recruited well at that position. So I think it starts there. I think anybody, if you're going to beat Arkansas, if you're going to limit KJ Jefferson, you have to say, I'm not going to let you run and beat me. I'm going to make you throw the ball. And maybe he can, and maybe he will. I'm sure he will for a lot of games because he's really good. But you just can't let that guy sit there and continue to rip off 8, 10, 12-yard runs and just beat you that way. So that's where I think it's got to start for LSU that day.
All right, let's get you out of here on this one. What are you expecting to hear from Brian Kelly today?
I think Brian is been very adept at not putting himself in a bad position. I mean, he's a veteran coach, obviously. I expect he's going to get asked a lot about the comments he made that were published a couple weeks ago about his team needing another year to be ready for national championship contention. He's going to have to answer that question a lot today because, guys, I don't know if you agree with it. I don't know how many people think this way. This is a team that's going to be preseason top 10, maybe top 5. They're probably going to be picked. I don't know. Are you guys going to pick Bama or LSU to win the West?
LSU.
They're probably going to leave here picked to win the West. We always get that wrong, so they probably won't. But it's just a completely different year this year because of expectation.
Change it up. Well, Matt, we appreciate it. Again, Matt Moscano, ESPN 104.5. Baton Rouge. Tom, if you want to blame someone for me working for you, it's actually him. Years ago, he told me.
So you're the guy.
I was in the midst of deciding if I was going to take the job or not, and I actually talked with him amongst others. And the best piece of advice he ever gave me is work for good management. Still working on that. We're still working on that. But
we can fix that.
Yeah, we can change that. So, Matt, we appreciate your time, man.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks.
BetOnline is your #1 source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.